The signal came from the edge of the solar system at 3:47 in the morning. It was not a question. It was not a greeting. It was a count. A slow, deliberate countdown broadcast on every human frequency at once, in a language no human had ever heard before, but which every translation system on Earth cracked within 4 minutes. The message said that the Riven Imperial Armada had arrived. It said that Earth was a Class 3 primitive world, and therefore eligible for absorption into the Riven Empire. It said that resistance would be noted, recorded, and ignored. And it said that the countdown from 100 would end with the first bombardment of Earth's largest population centers. The countdown was already at 89 by the time the first general picked up the phone. No one panicked. That was the first thing that surprised every analyst who studied the recordings later. No riots, no mass evacuations. People stepped outside their homes in the dark and looked up at the sky and then went back inside. Some made tea. Some called their families. A woman in a small coastal town sat on her porch and watched the stars and said nothing for a long time. When her neighbor asked if she was afraid, she shook her head. "Not really," she said. Inside the United Defense Council chamber, which sat 300 meters underground beneath a mountain range that appeared on no public map, 12 people took their seats around a circular table. General Adara was the last to sit. She wore a plain gray uniform with nothing on it except a single small pin above her left pocket. She did not look at the holographic display showing the incoming fleet. She already knew what was there. She had been briefed on Riven scouts entering the outer system 9 months ago. She had spent those 9 months making sure everything was ready. The council ran through the standard checklist in 6 minutes. Every item came back green. Lunar installations active, swarm networks online, rail platforms charged and locked, long-range intercept clusters in the outer belt positioned and waiting. The Riven Armada, 1,240 warships arranged in a crescent formation, was moving toward Earth at a speed that suggested total confidence. Their lead ships had not activated weapons yet. That was interesting. They expected Earth to surrender before they had to fire a single shot. Adara listened to the final status reports and then asked if anyone had anything to add. No one did. She looked at the countdown on the wall display. It was at 61. She authorized the response transmission. It was prepared and ready. The communications officer sent it in 11 seconds. The message traveled outward at the speed of light and reached the Riven fleet's communication relay 19 minutes later. 2 words. Every translator on every Riven ship processed them and returned the same result. "Come then." Back inside the chamber, someone poured water into a glass and set it on the table. Adara picked it up and drank slowly. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from fear, but from people who have done everything they can do and are now simply waiting for the thing they prepared for to begin. On the Riven flagship, a vessel so large it generated its own gravity field, Commander Doran read the translation 3 times. He had commanded 12 major campaigns across 4 star systems. He had absorbed 2 civilizations and broken a third. In all his years of service, no target world had ever replied to an Imperial ultimatum with anything except pleading or silence. He read the 2 words again. He laughed. It was a short laugh, genuine and dismissive. He turned to his first officer and told him to begin the advance. 1,200 warships started moving. Their engines lit up the edge of the solar system like a second sunrise visible from Earth's surface. People came out of their homes again and watched the light grow in the sky. A child in a northern city tugged her father's sleeve and pointed at it. "What is that?" she asked. "That," her father said, "is them making a mistake." Doran watched his fleet advance on the display. The little blue planet grew slowly larger in the forward viewport. His tactical officers were already calculating bombardment patterns, dividing Earth's surface into zones, estimating how long the population would take to formally request absorption terms. Standard procedure. He had done it dozens of times. His lead ships crossed the outer marker, the invisible line at which point Earth's orbital defenses would theoretically be within range. Theoretically, because every scan of Earth's orbital space had shown minimal defensive infrastructure. A few aging stations, some fighter platforms that looked decades old, nothing that could threaten a single Riven cruiser, let alone 1,200 of them. Then the moon moved. Not the whole moon, but enough of it that every sensor on every Riven ship screamed at once. Geometric seams appeared across hundreds of kilometers of lunar surface. Panels the size of cities slid open. What was underneath had clearly been there for a very long time. Doran leaned forward in his command chair. His tactical officer turned around slowly, and for the first time in the 8 years Doran had served with him, the officer's face showed something that looked like uncertainty. "Commander," he said, "those are rail platforms." Doran counted them on the display. He stopped counting at 90 because the number no longer felt relevant. "How long," he said quietly, "have those been there?" No one answered him, because no one knew, and because at that exact moment, every single one of those platforms finished their targeting sequence at the same time, and the space between the moon and the Riven advance fleet stopped being empty. The first thing Commander Doran noticed was the silence on his bridge. His crew were not trained to go silent. They were trained to report, to respond, to act. Silence on a Riven command bridge meant something had happened that the crew did not have a protocol for. He watched their faces as they stared at their displays and understood, one by one, what they were looking at. 94 rail platforms, each one carved into the moon's interior over what the geological analysis was now suggesting had been decades of work. Each platform was between 60 and 110 kilometers long. The projectiles they were designed to fire were not energy-based. They were not plasma. They were not particle beams, all of which Riven shielding was rated to absorb without difficulty. They were solid. Tungsten composite rods traveling at a calculated velocity of 11% the speed of light. Doran's shields were built to stop a star's coronal output. They were not built to stop a mountain, moving at 11% the speed of light. The first salvo hit the advance battle group before Doran could issue a single order. 43 warships. Gone. Not disabled. Not damaged. Gone in under 2 minutes, each one struck by a projectile that passed through its shielding like it was not there, through the hull like it was paper, and out the other side carrying most of the ship's interior with it. The impacts were silent in space, but on the sensor displays they showed as small white flashes, one after another, in a rhythm so steady it almost sounded like something being counted out. Doran ordered evasive scatter formation. He did it on instinct because it was the correct response to any coordinated kinetic attack. Every Riven captain received the order and executed it. The fleet spread out across a wider area of space, increasing the distance between vessels, making it harder to hit multiple ships in a single firing solution. It did not help. The rail platforms adjusted within 8 seconds, not recalculated, adjusted, as if something on the other end was watching the fleet move and correcting aim in real time. The second salvo was more accurate than the first, 51 ships. Then the swarms came out. They emerged from secondary bays along the moon's equatorial ridge, thousands of small autonomous craft, each one roughly the size of a Riven fighter but with no pilot, no life support, no wasted space, just propulsion, sensors, and weapons. They moved in coordinated clusters, not in any formation Riven doctrine recognized. They did not charge. They drifted wide, spreading around the fleet's flanks, and then they simply waited. Doran's tactical officer ran an analysis in 40 seconds and came back with something that made no sense at first. The swarms were not attacking yet. They were watching. Specifically, they were watching the Riven fleet's maneuvering patterns and mapping them. Every time a Riven ship changed heading, the swarms updated their models. They were learning the fleet in real time. Building a predictive map, of how 1,200 ships moved and responded to pressure. "How is that possible?" someone on the bridge asked. No one answered because the answer was obvious and uncomfortable. Earth had been preparing for this for a long time. Whoever built these systems had thought not just about how to stop an alien fleet, but about how an alien fleet would respond to being stopped, and then built something that accounted for that response. The rail platforms fired a third time. This time they were not aiming at ships in formation. They were aiming at where the ships were going to be. The difference was devastating. Riven evasive maneuvers are designed to make a target harder to predict. But when the targeting system already knows what your evasive patterns look like, the maneuver does not help. It helps the platform aim. Doran lost 60 more ships in 4 minutes. Admiral Prell, commanding the rear division of the Armada, watched the front collapse on his display and felt something he had not felt in 30 years of service. He opened a channel to Doran. "Commander, we need to withdraw." Doran did not respond immediately. He was watching his fleet total drop in real time, 1,240, now 970, now 812. "They have not touched the planet," Doran said. He meant it as something reassuring. The enemy's weapons were all outward-facing, defensive. But even as he said it, he understood what it actually meant. Earth was not fighting desperately. Earth was not throwing everything it had at them hoping something worked. Earth was calm. Earth was methodical. Earth had built a trap and baited them into it, and now it was being emptied like a net pulled from water. Prell's rear division tried to turn back. The outer belt responded. Long-range interceptors, positioned weeks earlier in the asteroid belt, activated and moved to cut off the retreat. They were faster than anything in the Riven fleet, not significantly faster, just enough. Enough to catch the ships that turned, enough to ensure that leaving was not going to be easy. Doran sat in his command chair and looked at the viewport. Earth was visible now, blue and white and very calm-looking, growing slightly larger as the fleet's forward momentum continued to carry it closer despite everything. He had not managed to fire a single weapon. He had not launched a single fighter. His shields had not stopped a single thing. He opened a fleet-wide channel and gave the only order that made any sense. "All ships stop, hold position, do not fire." The channel went quiet. Outside, the swarms moved into position around the fleet and waited, patient and completely still, like something that had all the time in the world. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. The Riven fleet held its position. The human swarms held theirs. The rail platforms on the moon were still loaded and still aimed. The interceptors in the outer belt had stopped moving. Everything in the solar system seemed to be waiting for someone to make a decision. Inside the Defense Council chamber, Adara watched the fleet status on the display and said nothing. One of the other council members suggested sending a second message. She shook her head. They had already said what needed to be said. 2 words were enough. Everything after that was the Riven fleet's choice to make. Doran made it. He ordered a distress signal broadcast toward Riven space. It was a standard Imperial emergency call, encrypted with his personal command code, and it carried a summary of the tactical situation and a request for immediate reinforcement. He did not expect fast help. The nearest Riven fleet was 11 light months away, but he needed the signal on record. He needed high command to know what had happened here. The signal went out and died. It traveled approximately 40,000 kilometers and then stopped, blocked by a jamming field that surrounded the entire solar system like a second atmosphere. Doran's communications officer ran diagnostics twice and reported the same result both times. Every outgoing frequency was being absorbed. Whatever was generating the jamming was not on the moon. It was not on any of the orbital stations. It was distributed, spread across thousands of small relay nodes positioned throughout the system over what must have been years of careful preparation. To jam an area that large required a level of coordination that most Riven military planners would have considered impossible for a species of Earth's apparent development level. But then, Earth's apparent development level had already proven to be a poor measurement tool. Doran called his senior officers to a briefing. There were fewer of them than there should have been. 3 of his 6 division commanders were gone. He looked at the faces of the ones who remained and asked each of them to give an honest assessment. None of them said anything encouraging. One of them, a quiet officer named Save, who commanded what was left of the Eastern Wing, said something that stuck. "They did not build all of this to stop us," Save said. "They built all of this before they knew we were coming. We are not a crisis they responded to. We are a scenario they planned for." Doran thought about that. "How long ago did they start?" he asked. Save checked his analysis. The rail platforms show geological settling consistent with at least 35 to 40 years of installation. The swarm manufacturing signatures suggest a continuous production program running for at least 25 years. The outer belt interceptors were positioned within the last 3 months. The jamming network took approximately 4 years to fully deploy. Someone else on the bridge said quietly, "They started before we knew they existed." That was not quite right. Earth had made contact with interstellar civilizations before the Riven arrived. Not with the Riven specifically, but with others. They had learned from those contacts what the universe outside their system was like. They had apparently decided very quickly what kind of preparation that required. Doran stood at the viewport for a while. The swarms outside had not moved. They were still positioned around the fleet in an arrangement that was, he noticed, almost geometric in its precision. Every ship in his remaining fleet had at least 2 swarm clusters within engagement range. If any Riven captain decided to fire a weapon, or accelerate, or attempt anything other than holding still, the response would be immediate and very close. They were not just surrounded. They were measured. Earth knew exactly where every ship was and had placed exactly enough force near each one to handle it. He asked his science officer how the swarms communicated with each other. She had been trying to figure that out for the past 20 minutes. The answer she came back with was uncomfortable. The swarms were not using any conventional communication frequency. They appeared to be using quantum state signaling, a method the Riven had theorized but never successfully implemented in a battlefield system because of the processing requirements. Earth had apparently solved that problem. "How long have they had quantum signaling?" Doran asked. "Unclear," she said, "but the network latency suggests they have been using it operationally for at least 15 years. Doran absorbed this. The Riven Empire had been expanding for 300 years. In that time they had encountered 64 civilizations. Most surrendered. Some fought and lost. 3 had technology that required serious campaigns to overcome. None had ever done what Earth just did, taken a 1,200-ship armada and reduced it to fewer than 300 functional vessels in under 20 minutes without taking a single confirmed casualty of their own. He did not know if Earth had taken casualties. He had not been able to damage anything on the Earth side. Not one station, not one swarm unit that he could confirm, not one rail platform. His fleet had fired nothing. There was nothing to aim at that the swarms would not have intercepted before it arrived. A soft chime sounded on the bridge. His communications officer looked up. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from Earth." Doran turned, "Put it on." The voice that came through was a woman's. Calm, unhurried, with no particular triumph in it, like someone making a practical announcement. "This is General Adara of Earth's United Defense Council. Your distress signal is being held. It will be released in 6 hours. In the meantime, we would like to invite Commander Doran to a conversation. Transport will be provided. You will not be harmed. We have questions for you and we suspect you have some for us." The channel stayed open, waiting. Doran looked at the viewport, at the swarms, at the fleet that was no longer an armada. He picked up his response handset. The human transport was small. It arrived at Doran's flagship without escort, which was either a statement of confidence or a demonstration that Earth no longer considered his ship a threat. He suspected it was both. The craft docked at the main hangar without requesting permission and without waiting for a signal. It simply matched velocity and attached a docking collar with the ease of something that had done this many times before. Two humans in sealed suits came through the airlock. They did not carry visible weapons. One of them carried a small case. They stood in the hangar and waited, and when Doran walked in with 4 of his personal guard, the humans looked at the guards and then looked at Doran and said nothing about them. The trip to Earth's orbital station took 40 minutes. Doran sat in the transport and watched the Riven fleet through the small viewport as they pulled away from it. From this angle from outside it, the fleet looked different than it did on a tactical display. On a display, ships were symbols and numbers. From here they were objects. Large, dark, silent objects drifting in a loose arrangement, surrounded at careful distances by clusters of small human machines that did not move but never looked away. The orbital station was not what he expected. He had seen the scans. It appeared modest from the outside, functional, without the scale or ornamentation of a Riven command installation. Inside it was clean and well lit and smelled like recycled air, which was apparently what human habitats smelled like. The humans he passed in the corridors looked at him with curiosity, not hostility. One of them, a young technician carrying a data pad, stopped walking and stared for a moment before catching themselves and moving on, as if seeing a Riven commander in their station was unusual but not alarming. He was brought to a room. It was a small room. A table, 2 chairs, a viewport looking out at Earth below, a soft overhead light, nothing on the walls. On the table were 2 ceramic cups and something hot in each of them. He did not know what it was. It smelled like something organic, mild, slightly bitter. General Adara was already seated when he entered. She was smaller than he expected from her voice, gray in her hair, steady hands, no weapons visible, no guards inside the room, though he was not naive enough to think there were not guards nearby. She gestured to the chair across from her with an open hand, and he sat, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then she picked up her cup and said, "It's called coffee, you don't have to drink it. I find it helps me think." Doran looked at the cup in front of him. He did not touch it. "You built all of that before you knew we were coming," he said. It was not a question. Adara treated it like one anyway. "We built it after we understood what the galaxy was like," she said. "First contact with any interstellar civilization teaches you things. Some of those things are encouraging, some of them are not." She set her cup down. "We learned that the universe has several kinds of neighbors, the kind that trade, the kind that ignore you, and the kind that show up with 1,200 warships and a countdown. You assumed we would come." "We assumed someone would come," she said. "We did not know who or when. We spent 38 years making sure the answer to who or when would not matter very much." Doran thought about Save's words on the bridge. They built this before they knew we were coming. He had thought it was an observation about Earth's foresight. Sitting here now, he understood it was something more than that. It was a description of a civilization that had looked at the nature of the universe, made an honest assessment, and then spent 4 decades preparing for the worst version of it without ever telling anyone they were doing so. "Why the secrecy?" he asked. Adara looked at him. "If you knew we had 94 rail platforms on the moon, would you have sent 1,200 ships or 12,000? He had no answer for that. She continued, "A defense that the attacker knows about is a negotiating tool. A defense the attacker doesn't know about is a decisive one. We preferred decisive." He looked out the viewport. Earth was below them, curved and bright, the Terminator line between day and night moving slowly across the surface. From up here it looked like something fragile. He knew now that it was not. "The jamming," he said. "You blocked my distress signal." "For 6 hours," she said, "as I told you." "Why 6 hours?" She considered this. Because we wanted this conversation to happen before your high command heard anything. Whoever carries a message shapes how it is received. We wanted you to carry this one, not our version of it. He looked at her carefully. You planned for the conversation too. We planned for everything, she said simply, and did not sound arrogant when she said it. The cup of coffee sat between them, still steaming. He reached out slowly and picked it up. He brought it close and smelled it. It was strange, not unpleasant. He set it back down. What do you want from me? He asked. Adara reached into the small case that one of her people had left on the table. She produced a flat data chip, about the size of his palm, and slid it across the table toward him. We want you to take that home, she said. Doran picked up the chip and turned it over in his hand. It was light, thinner than anything made by Riven Manufacturing. The surface had no markings on it and no visible data ports, but he could feel something in it, a faint warmth, a slight vibration too subtle to be called movement, like it was active, like it was already doing something. What is on it? He asked. Everything we are willing to tell you, Adara said. Our location, which you already have, our borders, which you do not. A full record of this engagement, including censored data from our side, so your analysts can understand exactly what happened and are not tempted to explain it away. And a set of terms. Terms, he repeated. Not demands, she said. Terms. There is a difference. A demand is issued from a position of power to someone who has no choice. A term is an offer that both sides can agree to because it is reasonable. We are offering terms. He set the chip down on the table. What terms? She told him. Earth was not asking for tribute, not asking for political recognition from the Riven Empire, not asking for a formal treaty in the imperial sense, with its hierarchies and its clauses about subordinate status. What Earth wanted was simpler, a boundary, a clear line in space beyond which Riven vessels did not cross without a prior agreement, not because Earth was afraid of what would happen, but because crossing lines without agreement was how things like this morning happened, and things like this morning were wasteful. She used that word specifically, wasteful. He asked her what happened to the ships that were destroyed. She told him the debris was being collected. Anything recoverable would be held. Any Riven crew members recovered alive from the destroyed ships, and she said there were some, from vessels that broke apart slowly enough for emergency systems to function, were being treated for injuries and would be returned with him when he left. He had not expected that. You recovered survivors, he said. 17, she said. 3 are in serious condition. Our medical teams are working on them. We are not certain our treatments are compatible with Riven biology, so we are being careful. We would welcome information about your medical needs if you are willing to share it. He stared at her. She picked up her coffee and drank from it, calm as if they were discussing logistics, which they were, except that the logistics were about enemy soldiers she had just finished defeating being tended to in her medical bays as if they were guests. Why? He asked. She set the cup down and looked at him directly. Because they are alive, she said, as though that was the only answer the question required. There was a long pause in the room. Outside the viewport, Earth turned slowly. A weather system was visible over one of the large ocean bodies, white and spiraling, enormous from up here but quiet-looking, peaceful. Doran had absorbed 2 civilizations. He had been present for the breaking of a third. He had watched species much older and more developed than Earth make their final pleas to Imperial High Command, and he had felt, if not pride, then at least a kind of professional satisfaction. This was different. This was a species that had every reason to be angry, that had just defended itself from an extinction-level invasion, that was currently holding the survivors of that invasion in its medical facilities. And the person leading it was sitting across a table offering him coffee and talking about terms. He tried to find the angle. In 30 years of command, every act of apparent generosity had an angle. Resources, positioning, intelligence, political leverage. He looked at Adara and tried to identify what she was getting from this. She let him look. She did not fill the silence with reassurances. She just waited. Eventually he said, "You want us to tell others?" Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, more like recognition. "The data chip contains a full account," she said. "When your high command reviews it, they will share it with their allies because that is what large empires do when they encounter new threat assessments. We know this. We are comfortable with it. You want the galaxy to know what happened here." "We want the galaxy to know what is here," she said. "There is a difference." She leaned forward slightly. "A species that fights back is a threat to be overcome. A species that fights back like this is something else. We would like the galaxy to have an accurate understanding of what we are before anyone else decides to come with a countdown." He picked up the data chip again. "And if High Command sends more ships," he asked, 12,000 instead of 1,200. She looked at him for a moment. Then she glanced at the viewport, at the planet below, and back to him. "Commander," she said, "we have been building things on the moon for 38 years. We have been building things in other places too. Places your scans have not found yet because we did not want them found yet." She paused. 12,000 ships would be a more interesting problem than 1,200. We would find it instructive. She said it without heat, without threat, the way someone describes a task they are genuinely prepared to do. Doran sat with the chip in his hand for a long time. Then he put it in his coat. "When does the jamming lift?" he asked. "In 40 minutes, she said. "Your signal will go through. Your fleet will be released. The survivors will be transported to your flagship before you depart. And the boarding teams on the surviving ships." "Already recalled," she said, 2 hours ago." He stood, she stood. They did not shake hands. He did not know if that was a human gesture or not, and she did not offer it. She simply inclined her head slightly, the way someone does when parting from a meeting that went the way they needed it to go. He walked toward the door and stopped. "The coffee," he said without turning around, "is it always that bitter?" "It gets better," she said. "You just have to drink it long enough." He left the room. The door closed behind him. Adara sat back down and finished her cup alone, watching the planet turn slowly below in the silence. The jamming lifted at the exact minute Adara had said it would. Doran's distress signal, compressed and waiting in the buffer for 6 hours, went out all at once. It reached the nearest Riven relay station in 11 hours and was forwarded to High Command within the hour after that. The full report, encrypted at command level, included his tactical logs, the sensor data from every surviving ship, and a personal addendum he had written during the trip back to his flagship. He did not try to soften the account. He had considered it. A commander returning with fewer than 300 ships from a campaign against a Class 3 primitive world had reasons to think carefully about how the report was worded. But the data chip in his coat contained Earth's own sensor records of the engagement, and those would eventually reach High Command through intelligence channels regardless of what he wrote. There was no version of this that could be made to look like anything other than what it was. He wrote the truth. The 17 survivors were transferred to the flagship's medical bay before departure. 3 of them were still in serious condition, but Earth's medical team had stabilized all 3 to the point where Riven physicians could manage the rest of the journey. Each survivor came aboard with a sealed medical document describing the treatments they had received and the medications used. The documents were written in Riven, translated by systems that had apparently been working from intercepted Riven communications long enough to be fluent. That detail, like many details from the last 12 hours, stayed with Doran quietly. The fleet, what remained of it, formed a loose transit column and began the long journey home. There was no ceremony, no final communication from Earth. The swarms peeled away as the ships crossed back past the outer marker and then simply stopped following, hovering at the boundary like dogs that would not cross a fence. The rail platforms on the moon were still visible on long-range sensors for several hours, still loaded, still aimed, patient in the way that things are patient when they have no urgency. Doran stood at the viewport for most of the first day of travel and said very little. Admiral Prell came to him in the early hours of the second day and asked what the chip contained. Doran had already read it twice. He handed it to Prell without comment and let him read it for himself. Prell sat in the briefing room for 2 hours with the chip and came out looking like a man who had done math several times and kept getting the same answer he did not like. The terms on the chip were simple enough to fit on a single page. Earth wanted a recognized boundary, a buffer zone of 30 light minutes around the solar system within which no Riven vessel would travel without advance notice and explicit acknowledgement. In exchange, Earth would not share the tactical data from the engagement with any other interstellar civilization without Riven High Command's prior knowledge, not because Earth needed to protect Riven dignity, but because Earth preferred orderly communication to the kind of chaos that comes when detailed military assessments circulate without context. Also on the chip was something that had not been in Adara's summary during their conversation. It was a short section, only 3 paragraphs, near the end of the document. It was titled simply, "For High Command." It said this: Earth had been watching the Riven Empire's expansion for 19 years. During that time, Earth had identified 16 civilizations currently under Riven control or in the process of absorption. Earth was not going to ask for those civilizations to be released. Earth understood that was not a realistic starting position for a first conversation. But Earth wanted High Command to know that it had been watching, and that it intended to continue watching, and that the boundary Earth was requesting was not a wall between enemies. It was a door, and Earth was, at the moment, choosing to leave it closed. That could change based on how the next conversation went. There was no threat in those paragraphs. There did not need to be. Anyone who had read the first section of the chip, with its sensor data and its 19-minute timeline, understood the implied weight behind a door that Earth was choosing to leave closed. High Command's response arrived 43 days after the fleet reached home. It was not a rejection. It was not an acceptance. It was a request. A formal diplomatic request, not a demand. The wording was careful about that, for a meeting. Neutral location, minimal delegations, no military vessels within 2 light hours of the meeting point. High Command proposed a small station at a midpoint between Riven space and Earth's system. Earth accepted in 4 hours. The acceptance included a suggested agenda and a note that Earth's representative would arrive without weapons, but would prefer if the Riven delegation did the same, as a gesture of good intent rather than a requirement. The diplomat High Command selected was a woman named Riva, career Foreign Service, known for her patience and her precise use of language. She had read the full engagement report 3 times before accepting the assignment. She arrived at the neutral station 22 days later on a small vessel with no armament and a crew of 9. Earth's representative was already there when she arrived. Adara. She was in the same plain gray uniform. No decorations. One small pin above the left pocket. She was sitting at the table in the meeting room with 2 ceramic cups and something hot in each of them. When Riva walked in, Adara looked up and gestured to the chair across from her with an open hand. Riva sat down. She looked at the cup. "What is this?" she asked. "Coffee," Adara said. "It gets better the longer you drink it." Outside the station's small viewport, nothing moved. No fleets, no swarms, no rail platforms, just the quiet dark between 2 civilizations that had decided, for now, to talk instead. Riva wrapped both hands around the cup. She took a sip. She did not say whether it was good or not, but she did not put it down.